And we're back for another episode of Standpoint. I'm Gabe Groisman, and we're here in the beautiful JNS studios in Jerusalem. Yes, believe it or not, I'm here for the holidays with my family, and I'm really excited to have my guests here. And it's a little bit of deja vu, but you wouldn't know about it. Sitting in front of me is member of Knesset, Minister of Diaspora Affairs, Amichai Chikli. This is the official episode 92 of Standpoint, and we've only had 2 episodes that were dropped, that we recorded, we did all the effort, and then something happened with the files. One was Mike Huckabee before he was ambassador, and 2 was Amichai Chikli. Thanks so much. In Miami, yes, he was in Miami. We had a great discussion, and I don't know, I think maybe it was too controversial. The podcast gods canceled that episode, but we're here again with Amichai. Thank you so much for doing this again. Today we're going to talk about a little bit about what's happening in the diaspora, especially in New York City, with the dropping of Mayor Eric Adams from the race. So we see what that race looks like. What's going on with Iran, the United Nations, a 21-point plan, what's going on here internally, all in about 30 minutes. So we'll try to get through it. So let's just start. The big news of the day yesterday is Eric Adams, the mayor of New York, dropped out of the race. He's been a great friend of the Jewish community. He's come to Israel. I hosted him here in Israel a few times. Any anti-Semitism initiative you need, he would do it. But it wasn't enough. The voters of New York are going a different direction. The public markets, poly market, today, after Adams dropped, still has Mamdani.
83.
Yeah, the last one was 84.9. They just ran a second one. I mean, it keeps going up. His chances of winning. You know, one of your big responsibilities here in the Knesset is to look after the diaspora, the Jewish community of the diaspora. What do you make of a candidate like that looking poised to win the city with the biggest Jewish population in the world?
So we are well familiar with the comments made by Mamdani in his past, especially globalizing the Intifada, his activities, pro-Palestinian activities. Is not a friend of the Jewish people. He's not a friend of Israel. That's obvious. And I think it's going to be a disaster, regardless of the Jewish community. It's going to be a disaster for New York to have this toxic combination of Marxism and Islamism for the mayor of New York. I think it's going to be disastrous. And the city will end like San Francisco. We saw San Francisco. We know what happened to San Francisco. And I'm saying again, regardless of the Jewish community, it is a big, big problem for the city itself. Now, with the Jewish community, you are from Miami, so you know that many Jews are immigrating from New York to Miami or to Texas or to Israel, and that's a wide phenomenon. And I'm afraid that for Jews in New York, it's going to be much more difficult with Mamdani. More hostile environment toward Jewish organization, especially Zionist organization. It's bad news. It's bad news for America. It's a very important city. It's bad news for New York. It's bad news for the Jewish community. And I hope something will change until the elections.
Yeah, a lot can happen between now and November, but it's not looking good.
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean for the state of Israel? We've heard Mamdani say that he would issue arrest warrants. We know I'm a lawyer, I'm a litigator. They don't have a basis to do so. But how does it change the efforts of someone in your chair as a Minister of Diaspora Affairs, who's very involved in activities in places like New York City, if a mayor like that were to be sitting in City Hall?
It means more anti-Semitism in New York, easily, and it can have spread to more cities, but I'm not sure it's going to spread, because I'm feeling that it's going to be like San Francisco. People will understand how bad is the leadership of Mamdani is going to destroy the city. People will get it. It will be too late. It will be disaster for the business in New York, and New York will need to recover. So I don't think it's going to have wide consequences outside of New York. But for Jews in New York, I believe the environment is going to be more hostile. For Israelis to come, the environment will be more hostile in universities, in Columbia, NYU.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at the Jewish vote in New York City, in the primaries, about 25% of the Jewish vote, according to polls, voted for Mamdani, which really just tells you about the Jewish community there. Yes, it's diverse, but we have a big portion of that 1.2 million or so that live there that are lost.
Yeah, I think that to be a Jew and to vote for Mamdani, that's bizarre, but that's not news. We have JVP, Jewish Voice for Peace. We have J Street. We have anti-Zionist Jewish organization. It's a phenomenon that exists. It's a terrible phenomenon, but I don't think they represent the future of Jewish community in America. And most of these people who are involved in JVP, J Street, they may be Jewish, but their grandchildren, they're not going to be Jewish.
Yeah,
because when you take out Zionism for Jewish identity, there is no Jewish identity.
Yeah, I agree with that. In the diaspora, at least, Zionism and some level of religious practice and connectivity, so it can go on to the next generation. You see places like South Florida, we're almost at 500,000 Jews in South Florida now. People don't even know that number, which is crazy, right? I mean, it's growing by leaps and bounds. Let's just jump to Iran. I was reading this morning. There's lots of reports, all unconfirmed reports, lots of rumors, but that's why I want to ask you about it, about Iran and the enriched uranium stockpiles, whether they were or weren't hit, whether there's another attack that's coming from the United States and Israel. What do you know about it?
What we know for sure is that the nuclear plan of Iran was dramatically infected by the attacks, especially the attack in Pordo, and it went back a decade backwards. It doesn't mean that they won't be able to make an effort to continue and develop nuclear weapons in the future with the assistance of Russia or North Korea or Pakistan. So it's not that there is a zero threat coming from Iran, but the impact of the attack on the scientists and Isfahan, Fordo, and other sites is that, as for now and for the near future, Iran lost its capabilities to produce in a short term nuclear weapons.
How do you connect the dots? Russia jumped to the table very quickly. They offered, if I'm not mistaken, they said they're going to invest $25 billion in rebuilding Iran's nuclear capabilities. They're selling them jets. They're really just trying to, from my perspective, they're trying to leverage against the United States pressure. So how does that all play together with the rest of the big global wars that we're seeing?
Yeah, you can see that there's an axis of China, Russia, North Korea, Iran. On the other hand, you have Europe, NATO, the United States, and Israel that are in, let's say, the Western civilization strategic hemisphere. It doesn't mean that we always agree. It doesn't mean that there are no problems, but that is the equation. It's not really new, and it's not surprising to anyone who is following after the conflict and the missile defense system that were used in Iran during the war are Russian. The S-300, etc., and the weapons that were used by Hamas on October 7, a lot of the weapons are Russian weapons. Some of the weapons come from China. So that is the situation. I think that the most interesting player is Turkey, which is playing on both sides, meaning they are aligned with Hamas and also part of NATO. I think it's a great paradox, and I think that NATO should reconsider the presence of Turkey as a member of NATO, and including the US, if you support Hamas, if you support Al-Qaeda in Syria, if you are supporting the ethnic cleansing of Druze and Kurds in Syria, I don't think it's right for the, let's say, the empire of the Western civilization to back these kind of forces.
So I couldn't agree with you more, but President Trump looks like he's taking the opposite course, right? He's there's a F-35 deal on the table for Turkey right now, and they're saying as long as you don't buy from Russia anymore, they're trying to separate them from Russia and bring them to our side of the column, which seems like a really tough task.
Yes, I think that first I highly appreciate President Trump, and I think we owe him a lot, not just for what happened recently in the current term, but also the Abraham Accords, the embassy, in Jerusalem, the weapons that we can buy, unlike what happened with Biden and the embargo and the don't that he said to Hezbollah, but was more to Israel. But still, I do have, let's say, a disagreement in regarding Turkey and President Ashara. I think that if you want to ban the Muslim Brotherhood in the U.S., which I know that Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz is pushing this law ahead, but on the other hand, to embrace Al-Qaeda leader in Syria as a legitimate leader, it contradicts, meaning the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood and the ideology of Al-Qaeda is basically the same, okay? Restore the caliphate, going back to the core values of Islam. That is the same family of ideology, even if it's not exactly the same, okay? It's more of the same. Now, going back to Turkey, Trump's highly appreciates, power and successful people and business approach. And I think, when you are a statesman, it makes sense. It makes sense. You have interest. You want to develop the economy. You want to have good business for your country. And that is, I can perfectly get it. But I think that when you look at the leader of Western civilization, there must be also another level, the ideological level. You try and understand what is the vision of Erdogan. Does the vision of Erdogan can coexist with the vision of Western civilization, with the vision of America, not just Israel? Meaning, I do expect from America to protect Christian minorities, okay? In Nigeria, in Syria, to protect the Alawites, the Druze, not meaning necessarily by boots on the ground, but at least to say something regarding the Druze, regarding the Alawites, and the Alawites were our enemies, but still I'm not in favor in going and doing an ethnic cleansing against the Alawites and making hundreds of unarmed men to crawl, to bark, and then to execute them, and then to throw their bodies into the rivers. Then the world is quiet. It's quiet. And that includes America. Quiet regarding what happened to the Alawites, the Druze, what happening to the Kurds. And I think that there is an additional role for America on the moral level. It's not just business.
Yeah, that's true. And there's a big debate internally in the United States how much that's still relevant or not. And many of us in the conservative movement are arguing, obviously, that it is, even within the, quote, America first, whatever that means, movement. America first doesn't mean America alone.
Yeah, and one more thing about Erdogan. What's the vision of Erdogan? First, he's a dictator. Okay? The opposition, the entire leaders of the oppositions are in prison, journalists in prison, zero freedom. Okay, we all admire freedom. We recall now the shirt of Charlie Kirk. Freedom is the core of Western civilization. Freedom is the core of Judeo-Christian values, because it is the foundation for having a choice to then to choose the right way and to commit the mitzvot of the Torah, or the expectations from Christian people, etc. Now, when you look at Erdogan, he first and foremost is against freedom. He is against democracy. He is against the core values of Western civilization. Second, he sees himself as like a new sultan. He wants to be to restore the glory of the Ottoman Empire. That is a very, very serious threat. He sees himself as an emperor, as the man who will lead Turkey to become once again an empire. He is involved in the war in Libya. He is involved in the war in Somalia. He is involved in the war in Syria. He was leading the war in Syria. He is threatening Cyprus. He is threatening, and they are occupying northern Cyprus. He is threatening Greece, saying that some parts of the Greek islands are Turkey, and the same goes to the sea. And he's a very, very dangerous man. And on top of the fact that he's a dictator, on top of the fact that he sees himself as an emperor of a new Ottoman Empire, he's also a fanatic jihadist in his heart. He's part of the Muslim Brotherhood that we want to ban, or the Senate want to ban in America. He believes in the caliphate, in making all the citizens of Turkey and all the citizens of Syria to live by Sharia law. So it's not just that he's a dictator. It's not just that he's sees himself as the new Ottoman Empire leader, but he's also a fanatic jihadist. And therefore, I don't understand how can he be part of NATO. NATO is just an alliance of random states, or there's some philosophy behind it of freedom against tyranny, against occupying foreign countries, against oppressing minorities.
Well, I wrote a piece on NATO on NATO and Turkey maybe a year ago. When you go through the principles of NATO that everyone signs on to, including not harboring terrorists, which Turkey does. But it seems like the U.S. and maybe even Israel are prioritizing, when you were talking earlier about...
And by the way, harboring terrorists.
Yeah, of course.
Turkey today is the new headquarters of Hamas.
Right.
It's not just Doha in Qatar, which is another story. It is also Turkey.
Yeah.
Most of Hamas leaders and Hamas activity. And by the way, Hamas, unfortunately, is not about to disappear tomorrow morning. And the activity of Hamas is going to shift from Gaza to Turkey for, let's say, more the global terrorism in Europe, picking targets abroad. And that is the new threats that we are facing. And this threat is coming from the heart of Turkey. That's another point.
For sure. And that was the impetus of me writing that piece when they moved, a lot of the leadership moved out of Doha into Turkey, and nobody cared. Nobody wrote about it. Nobody looked at every major newspaper. Nobody raised their hair on it. But it seems like the Western governments, Israel, the United States in particular, maybe even Europe has its own problems, but are prioritizing trying to pull them away from Russia and China, unsuccessfully, by the way, but trying to do that more than all those principles that you're talking about.
Yeah, I think it's complicated. I'm not saying it, and then the Turkey is an important state in terms of it's a huge state, strong economy, strong army. It is a challenge.
And Qatar is the same thing.
Yeah.
Qatar is the same thing, and everybody still plays with them.
PR and oil and gas superpower.
Yes. Exactly. And from my perspective, just to share very quickly, I think when it comes to global foreign policy and dealing with different foreign policy between countries, people can't sit on the fence. Countries can't sit on the fence. They have to clearly define who they are, right? So I have less of a problem with a terrorist state who defines themselves as a terrorist state. So then you know how to deal with them, right? You're going to deal with them like a terrorist state than the ones that are trying to play both sides. And people are so eager to accept them. The Europeans are eager to accept them mostly because of the Islamization of Europe and trying to figure out how to deal with it. But they are, like people are writing these days, they have suicidal policies in Europe these days. The policies that they're implementing across Europe are not good for the future of Europe. Just to keep things moving a little bit, this week, I mean, who knows? To bring this up is even challenging because the news moves so fast. But as this is being filmed, there's lots of discussions about this 21-point peace plan. Netanyahu has said that Israel is working towards it, has basically said they've accepted it. Trump has said the deal is there. He said that before, but the deal hasn't come to fruition. What are your thoughts on the deal that's on the table today? Do you think that's something Israel should be moving forward with? What do you think?
Look, so first, I really want to say one more thing regarding the previous part of our conversation regarding Qatar. When you look at Qatar, Qatar is today the capital of Muslim Brotherhood. That's the ideological engine of jihadist propaganda through AJ Plus and Al Jazeera in Spanish, French, in the US, through social media, TV. And they're not just hosting the leaders of Hamas. They are the main PR tool for Hamas, for HTS in Syria, Jolani, Ashara, who I think that people have forgotten who is Ashara.
Right.
He founded Al-Qaeda in Syria. He was involved in the worst massacres of innocent people, of Yazidis, of Kurds, of Alawites, of Druze. More than 1,000 Alawites, more than 1,000 Druze. When he was speaking in the UN, you had Christian villages being burned deliberately in the region of Latakia. So I think that the fact that Western countries embraced Ashara because he was wearing a suit so fast, I think it's a tragedy. And the same goes to Qatar. Qatar, Syria, Turkey, that's an axis, the axis of the Muslim Brotherhood, and it possesses threat for the UAE. They won't say it loud. Same goes for Saudi Arabia and the moderate forces in the region. And by the way, that includes also Jordan, for instance. Now, going back to your question and Hamas, the day after, we need to make sure, one, that Turkey and Qatar are out of Gaza, because you don't want the same ideology of Hamas, which is the ideology of Erdogan, which is the ideology of Qatar, to continue to spread this poison to the minds and hearts of younger generation in Gaza. Because if you will keep to push this ideology of jihad and war, you're going to have war. And you're going to have the children who are, when they are 20s, they're calling their parents, hey, see, mom, I just killed 10 Jews with my bare hands. So proud. That is insane. But it's a result of a very specific education. The same education that you get now in Syria of Ashara. And we already seen the videos coming from Syria. Schools with upon the name of Gaza or Muhammad Def or Sinewar. And the kids are swearing first thing in the morning to the path of jihad and Allah, etc., etc. That is the kids of Syria under Ashara, meaning 15, 20 years from now, we are in a war against the new Hamastan on the northern border. That's a fact. Because eventually, I'm going back to my point, when you look at the reality, you must wear the ideological lenses, because not everyone is seeing the world in terms of strictly business. There's also visions and ideology, and the vision of Hamas and the vision of the Muslim Brotherhood, of Ashara, of Turkey, of Qatar, is a super dangerous vision.
Let me ask you a direct question, because related to one of the points in the plan is to bring, they say, Arab militaries to Gaza. And then there's also allusions to the Palestinian Authority again. Suddenly Abbas condemned October 7th. He's now a good guy trying to position himself to get into Gaza. You know, what's your take on bringing in troops from places like Saudi Arabia?
First, regarding the Palestinian Authority, we already had the Palestinian Authority in Gaza. We saw the results. I think it would be losing our mind to repeat the experiment of Palestinian Authority. In terms of military force or weapons, it should be merely police force, nothing more than police force. I'm not a big fan of foreign armies going into Gaza. Maybe it can be a partial solution with states that are part of the Abraham Accords, but I'm far from being a fan of this idea, and I think it needs to be based on new leadership from the population in the parts that would be ruled by Palestinians. More important to me is how do we shape the border the day after? Because we cannot keep the borders of October 7th. Not morally, it is not just. And second, operationally, militarily, we need to sit in Bet Hanun and the hills that are controlling the northern part of Gaza Strip. We need to keep the ridges on the east, ridge number 70, 80, not far away from Sajaiya. We need to keep perimeter, wide perimeter on the Philadelphia corridor. Egypt had the opportunity to do something in order to prevent the river of weapons that were flooding Gaza and allowing October 7th. They did nothing. They did zero, okay? And they cannot be trusted. And therefore, we cannot allow a withdrawal from Philadelphia. And that is, I think, the most important thing to me. How do we control the security of Gaza so that we can operate just like in Judea and Samaria? If there's a problem, you can send 2 jeeps with a platoon and arrest anyone you need to arrest. There won't be a situation, once again, of a Hamas state, of a terror state that can develop weapons, that can develop missiles from Gaza. That's a no-go. We cannot accept it.
Help us understand, just technically for a second, if there were a deal that were to be entered into, who would have to approve it here in Israel? Would it be just the war cabinet? Would it go to the Knesset? Or is it just the prime minister? How does that work?
So far, it was going through the government cabinet and then the entire government that will vote for it. I'm not sure we need to have the Knesset involved in this decision, but I think it would be worthwhile also to put it in the Knesset to have a wider consensus on ending this very long war.
Yeah, so on that point, there's a big political divide in Israel. There was one before the war started. People forget the summer of 2023 was the summer of the judicial reforms, and that's when all the Kaplan protests really started and blocking highways, etc. But we're 2 years into the war. Those divides continue. People have different approaches to them. I have my opinion, but I won't share them yet before hearing yours. My real question is, we've heard the prime minister speak about this a little bit, but from your perspective, how much should the government be paying attention to the growing divide within the country on the war and the status of the war?
Actually, I don't see a growing divide.
Okay,
I think that the gap between right and left were narrowed and shrinked during the war. I think that during the war, you have many people who were in the left that understood that the idea, the concept of a Palestinian state in Judea and Samaria is irrelevant. We saw the experiment of Hamastan in Gaza, which de facto was a state.
Yeah.
They had their own economy, government, army, a terror army, and almost no one in Israel after October 7 is willing to accept another terror state in Judea and Samaria, and that was a significant part of the political debate. So it doesn't mean necessarily that they will now vote for the coalition parties, but on the strategic security dimension, there's no big debate. You have a consensus against a Palestinian state in Judea and Samaria. People understand the importance of the settlement, the villages in Judea and Samaria. People who lives in Kfar Saba, who lives in Rosh Hashanah, they know very well that Ariel and Kdumim, 20 minutes driving from Kfar Saba, that is the shield of the main villages, the main cities of the beach. Okay, the villages on the mountains are the shield for the cities on the beach. And that is regardless to the fact that that's the historical homeland of the nation of Israel, Mount Ival, Shiloh,
sure,
Jerusalem, Hebron, etc. So I don't think that there's a wider gap. You have a small group that possess a lot of power, newspapers, elites that are post-Zionist, that are in favor of surrendering to Hamas and ending the war at all cost. I don't think that they represent the majority. You can see the polls. You can see the polls. We have a majority in the polls. The the Likud is the largest party in the polls. And when you look at the other, let's say, the other side, the opposition, so many of the leaders within the oppositions that are not in the far left. So you have a center-right solid majority in Israel, especially after October 7th. So I don't see these divide as you see it.
No, that's an interesting perspective. And what I always see is when I speak to any people on the left in Israel, I get to because I work a lot with technology companies, and that's who runs many of the tech companies in Tel Aviv. And I always say to them, you have a political problem as you see it, but you don't propose a political solution, right? There's no like growing leadership from the left that's viable in any way, shape, or form, even for them, right? So they get to kick and scream a lot.
But on the other hand, take a look at Gideon Sa'ar, who took his party back to the coalition. Take a look at Benny Gantz, despite the fact that now is in a low point, but he's saying I'm done with banning Likud and banning Netanyahu and saying we will never sit with Netanyahu. Some leaders are now more mature and more responsible, and I think that for the future. I believe we're going to see, let's say, a wider coalition.
Interesting. Okay, my final question to you as Minister of Diaspora Affairs. You've spent now a lot of time focusing on what's happening outside the country. Mm-hmm. It's something I focus on a lot in the Jewish world, all over the world. The war and the beginning of when the war started, we saw unity. We saw what people would call October 8th Jews, sometimes positive, sometimes negatively.
Positive.
We'll leave it in positive, right? Just people who sort of were awakened.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes the enemy to awake you and remind you who you are. But over time, we're starting to see that sort of weaken with maybe with how long the war is going on. We had weak roots before that. If you looked at any figures and data on the Jews in the diaspora, what has surprised you the most in your time now as Minister of Diaspora Affairs? What have you learned from traveling around the world and focusing on the diaspora Jewry?
So I think that both for the Jewish community abroad and for the state of Israel, we need to have alliance with movements, leaders that share the core values of Jewish identity. Jewish identity is about faith, it's about family, it's about community. Judaism is conservatism if you look at it today. And we need to connect with these movements. And I think that when you look at what's happening now in Britain, raising the color, Reform UK, and you hear their statements, and you see the Israeli flags, and you see their statements against anti-Semitism, against Hamas, against terror, against radical Islamism. These are the people that we need to collaborate with. It's true for the state of Israel, and I think it's also true for the Jewish community. Now, when you look at Britain, it's an interesting case because the formal leadership of the Jewish community was more aligned with the progressive movement. And I think that this alliance with the progressive movement is totally destroyed. You cannot repair it. It's lost. And it takes for, let's say, the old leadership of Jewish communities to take a dramatic shift and to move into other alliance with people that in the past you might be against them. And I think that the new form of alliances won't come from the old leadership, but from the new Jewish leadership that is emerging, that is more connected to Jewish core values, and that is willing to have new alliances with especially conservative forces. And it's very clear in places like Britain, in places like Canada, Australia. Who do you want to work with? With the Labour Party that embrace radical Islam, that is banning former ministers from Israel to enter the country? Who do you want to work with in this kind of parties. There's nothing to work with. And compare Carney or Trudeau to Pierre Poilievre or Melissa Lantsman in Canada. You cannot compare. Or compare the current leadership of Macron, who is an anti-Semite, who is pro-Hamas, who has done a huge damage for the hostages and the state of Israel and the Jewish community. And by the way, he refused to walk with the Jewish community in the parade against anti-Semitism, march against anti-Semitism at the beginning of the war. And who was in this march against anti-Semitism? Marine Le Pen. And later on, who spoke against Hamas? Who spoke against anti-Semitism? Who visited here? Who went to Jordan Bardella? So things are changing. And if you're going to be stuck in the past, it's not going to be good. And not for the Jewish communities and not for the state of Israel. So we need to reshape the alliances that we have. And it's true for Europe, Australia, Canada, and it's true for the US.
Yeah, and South America as well, obviously. Same thing. You go,
Milei,
Milei and Chile. Now we're seeing it go back and forth. Hopefully it'll switch the other direction. Listen, just to tie it all together, when we were talking about the two different axes that are growing, maybe there's more than two, but two major axes that are growing with Israel and the United States and others. You spoke about Europe. I let it pass because that would be a full other podcast on where Europe ends up, right? But Israel and the Jewish community are on one side of that, and we have to realize that. And Jews are realizing that all over the world. And I think one thing we've all realized, those who needed to be reminded, but we've all really learned, I think in Israel as well, that what happens in Israel really impacts Jews all over the world. And when there's a strong Israel, Jews are safer around the world. And what's incredible, it's one of those things you learn. I get chills saying it. Mm-hmm. It's one of those things you learn as a child, and you think, okay, is that really true? You know, when you start developing your own intellect, it's a nice thing to say. Is it really true? Now we're learning that it's absolutely true. Mm-hmm. So we pray for a full victory against Hamas, wipe out Hamas at the end of this year. Before Yom Kippur, hopefully this war will be over. The hostages will be returned. Amen. We won't have to fight this enemy. We'll be ready for the next one as we rebuild the Jewish people and the Jewish state. Thank you, Amichai Chikli.
Amen. Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Chatima Tova.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Israel.
This one was better than the first one.
Maybe.
We'll never know. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it. Make sure to like, follow, subscribe, and do all the great things you do to support podcasts. And we'll see you next time.